Lyle, are we ready to go? I can see that it says we're streaming on YouTube.
Yeah, I just went up. So yes, we are now. So all to you.
Thanks, Lyle. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Town Board special meeting for Friday, September 25th, 2020. The purpose of today's meeting is for the Town Board to consider whether to accept as complete the draft generic environmental impact statement that has been prepared by our consultants, Kimley Horn, with regard to our form-based code project for the Chappaqua Hamlet. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Sabrina Charney-Hull, who is our Director of Planning, who will take us through today's agenda. Sabrina?
Thanks, Ivy. Good morning, everybody. I hope everyone's doing well today. You received a lot of information regarding the draft generic environmental impact statement in relation to consideration of adoption of a form-based code for the study area within the Chappaqua Hamlet. Today, this morning, I have with me the consultant team consisting of Bonnie Von Olsen, Michael Youngins, and John Canning, who will be here today to walk you through changes within the draft generic environmental impact statement from its last submission to us in July of this year. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bonnie. Bonnie, do you want to walk the board through, and then we can have further conversation if necessary?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us here. I have a few slides just sort of to bring everyone up to speed on where we are and what's transpired since we submitted the document in July. And then I was going to walk through the revisions, the completeness revisions that the town provided to us, and where we made revisions. I thought that might be the most efficient, and we can go in great detail, or we can go, I'll try to do a high level overview so that we don't get, taking too much of your time. But I have Mike and John invited as well, so that if you have any specific questions regarding infrastructure or traffic and parking, they're available as well. So if that's okay, I will share my screen. Can I do that? Apologize if I look to the side because my camera's on my laptop and my big screen is where I'm going to show the slides. I'll see the slides. Okay. All right. So as the supervisor said, we are discussing the submission of the draft environmental impact statement for completeness, which really has to do with the adequacy for public review of the document as per the adopted scoping outline. So we set to work on the impact statement and submitted the first draft on July 17th. That was the full volume 1 and volume 2, which is the appendix. We broke it into 2 books because the second one is several hundred pages, with the appendix being the technical studies. In addition to the draft code, the seeker documents, the detail on the build out, the market scan report. And that's not all the appendices listed there. That's just the primary ones. And the town, I believe Sabrina distributed it to the lead agency and to the departments within the town, and compiled the comments in a memo and also in a track changes document, which we used to modify the document. So September 17th, we resubmitted the document for the second review with all of those tracked and clean version of the DGIS. We submitted a response memo as well that had areas that Sabrina and I and the town engineer and I had discussed about where a comment perhaps was substantive versus completeness, and could be addressed later in the process and wasn't really part of the scope in our opinion. And Sabrina and I and the team discussed all of those as we were going through.
Bonnie, can I ask
Yeah.
you to pause for just a moment and just explain the difference between a completeness comment and a substantive comment?
Sure. The completeness review section, and Sabrina and Nick can add to this as well, is really, as I said, you go through the scoping document, which is supposed to identify what you're going to study, to what detail level you're going to study it, and whether the document has all of those pieces in it. That's really the purpose of the completeness review. And you'll see when we go through, there's little, minor corrections and additions that make it more readable, but the primary revisions were where a section was perhaps not as to the same level of detail as the other sections in the document, or where there might have been a piece of the scope that Sabrina felt that we didn't adequately address. So, but a substantive comment would really be perhaps an opinion on the actual project. It's not really a project, but you know what I mean, on the legislation or the results of the impacts. In other words, I think that's really the gist of it, is it's an opinion of that's going to come out in the public hearing, and also in all of your comments and in the technical comments that we receive. That's what we will address in the final. So that's really the difference.
Thanks, Bonnie. I just wanted to make clear for everyone that when we are considering acceptance of this draft generic environmental impact statement as complete, what we are doing is we are looking to see whether all of those issues that we had identified as part of our scope document, as part of the outline of the potential environmental impacts that we needed to have our consultants study, that each of those areas has been adequately addressed. And so what the town board is doing today does not have to do with acceptance of what is in the code, but merely acceptance of the work that was done to analyze those scope elements that were identified back in February as a result of the public hearings that were held at that time.
Correct. And even not even the code itself, but even the impact statement and with the impacts that resulted that we are presenting. It's not to give an opinion on those one way or the other. It's just to make sure that it was adequately addressed. That's correct. So in the time between September 17th submission and today, we worked with the town staff intensively on resolving and addressing some of the completeness issues having to do with the sanitary. And that's an example of the existing conditions was not felt that it was addressed adequately enough. And we delved deeper into the WSP reports and the as-built drawings, and Mike can go into a little bit of that later. But that's really what this last week was generating, making sure that that was adequately addressed to the same level of detail that, for instance, the traffic study and the parking and the zoning and some of the other chapters were. So this is what we're talking about today. And this is really kind of detail about what will happen next, you know, the technical aspects, and if it's complete, setting the public hearing date, getting it distributed and all of that for seeker purposes. And so I will probably, I'm just going to finish these slides, but then I'm going to take you through the actual track document so we can stop and you can ask questions at any particular point and see what the completeness revisions entailed. And then if the hearing is set for October 20th, which I realize is the tentative date being considered, the hearing will be opened on the draft code, and the final steps will be when the hearing is closed, we will be preparing the final environmental impact statement based on the comments received. At that point, we'll go through a similar process where we will prepare the draft, the town will review the responses, and it's important to note that that's not a scope comparison for completeness. That's really more for the board, the lead agency, to understand and be comfortable with the responses that are provided. That's going to be what you're going to base your findings on. So that really is going to be the place where you're able to give your opinion on the environmental impacts based on the technical record. And then it will be after that that the seeker process ends and you will adopt the new legislation. Also during the FEIS process is where if there are revisions to the code because you were not happy with this way something is drafted or the impacts led you to believe that you wanted to change it, that could either happen, you know, technical revisions could happen after the FEIS, but that would probably happen in the FEIS, and you would then be providing the revised code that could, you know, be then adopted immediately after. So any questions on that before I just go ahead to start walking through? No? Okay. All right, sorry about that. You're gonna see my pictures, maybe. My screen. Okay. So I have the September 17th version up because that has 99% of the revisions that we made were in there, except for the sanitary, which I have as a separate chapter at the end. There were also 2 minor revisions to the code, which I have as a separate chapter at the end that we can look at separately. Let's see, obviously all the page numbers were updated. This is just what happened to show on that day. There's an executive summary, description of proposed action, which is a really thorough chapter that describes what's being done, why it's being done. It goes into the details of the generic aspect of this and the maximum build out scenario and the assumptions with that. So that's an important chapter that we actually submitted a preview to Sabrina back in June and went over the details of that to make sure that was what you were looking for. And then chapter 3 is the environmental existing conditions, impacts, and mitigation with all the various topics and chapters. And then chapter 4 is the alternatives. So just one of the things we added, it was requested that the photographs that are in the visual section be separately listed. So now there's a new list of that. The executive summary, I'm not going to really go through specifically because everything else is somewhere else in the document and then it was just compiled in the summary. The description of the action. If it's okay, I'm just going to scroll through. I know it might be a little dizzying, but you'll just see the general level of revision. This was just a clarification, which many of these are about the civic land uses. This way. I'm going to skip to pages that have revisions. Just an exhibit. Well, one of the diagrams that was added was for the proposed build out. There was some confusion on the assumptions. This is showing the build out existing and proposed that Tortigalis put together. And there was some confusion on, there were assumptions about lots being consolidated. So this is the actual diagram of the build out itself, which you have seen before. And this shows the assumptions that Tortigalis made on where they were assuming lots could be consolidated in this maximum build out scenario. Another thing that was added in this section was the historic map. And which is a blurry version right there on my screen, but you had seen that previously as well.
Bonnie, can I just direct your attention back to the consolidated map for a moment? Is it correct that the reason why, now this isn't an actual, nor is it proposed, these are private property owners.
Correct.
So the town would have no ability to force a consolidation or to even encourage this. This was only for the purposes of trying to create conditions where the maximum build out that analysis that is required under seeker could be
If I may, Jill?
generated. Yeah, please.
If I may, so it's very difficult to take legislation, which isn't normally something that you would test under seeker, under the State Environmental Quality Review Act. So we had to convert the legislation to an actual theoretical project, if you will. Historically, in our hamlet, our lot sizes are very small. So in order to realize our code, even our existing code, we had to do a combination of land, you know, to get to a certain size where we could test the impact of what the legislation is calling for. Completely theoretical, because we have no control over private property. As we know, as practitioners, combining property that is currently held by different owners is very, very complex. And in actuality, in most cases, will never happen. But we needed something to test the impacts against. And so the consolidated parcel map that Bonnie is showing right now was tested on the code today, right? And we all know, given where we are today in development of our hamlet, it was also the same map was tested under the proposed code. So we could compare virtually apples to apples when it comes to legislation.
Okay, I just wanted a clarification that this was a purely
Absolutely.
theoretical
I wanna-
exercise.
I
Right.
want to stick with that just very briefly as well. So for example, if you're looking at that triangle on the west side, yeah, right there, that's the current or former Rite Aid spot. That is also the Susan Lawrence spot. Those are just two, for example, all those structures and building owners there would have to join together to say, we want to build this out. And you could follow through. It's hard to see on this map, at least on our screen, but you're talking dozens of,
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking, all these landowners would have to say, we all want to unite together, sell to somebody, find it, have common ground. We all agree on everything to make that happen. But nonetheless, you have to do this by law to describe and show what, theoretically, whether it's a 0.0001% chance of happening, you have to show this as a build out by law,
Yes,
whether it'll ever or could happen.
correct.
And
Thank
if
you.
you recall, we had quite a bit of discussion about this during the scoping,
Yes.
because we wanted to show something that could happen, as you say, because you would be adopting the code with some assumptions. And so that's why, as you go through the impact statement, it's evident in all the various categories, but that's really what the purpose of it was to identify, if this case did occur, what would the impacts be on all the various different.
Bonnie, if I may, because I think this is
Yep.
important.
Yep.
This is purely hypothetical. If it happens, it will be voluntary, totally voluntary. But it's important to note, and there's been some commentary that it has a 0.01 chance of happening. But the purpose of the code is to provide the mechanism that if the property owners want to, and to provide the incentive for it to happen. And the goal of the code is for at least a good portion of this to happen over time voluntarily. Because if there's only a minimal chance of it happening, then there's no point in doing the code.
If I may, though, let me just kind of close this conversation, because I don't want
I don't
to
know if
take
that's accurate either,
this
John.
conversation away from what we want to do. We are charged under seeker to show the maximum, to understand what the maximum impacts are. That's not to say that if the code gets put in place, we will not see development, but in general, the lot sizes in our hamlet today are too small to reach the levels that we have shown in GEIS. Okay, that's the facts. And so with that, Bonnie, I want you to continue going through this. I don't want to get stuck on this conversation.
I don't either, but I do want to make it clear that I disagree with John's last statement. That is
I do
not,
too.
yeah, that completely. So I think, John, what you said, that may be your view and from a technical standpoint, but that is not, certainly not my view in terms of,
Okay.
that is not our goal. This is because we have to build it out by law to show what could happen, but that is not our goal, and nor could we force or coerce or ask or anything like that with private
Okay.
property.
I beg your pardon.
Okay, so back to the pages. These are just use. Okay, so coming up to land use. We clarified some of the definitions or descriptions of the categories that we used for land use. This, of course, includes all of the comparable town comprehensive plan language, existing and proposed impervious. We did as on a hamlet-wide basis. This has to do with buffers adjacent to areas that are not in the district. And we talked to Torty Gallus and highlighted the areas and added this language in here that describe the buffers that are required adjacent to residence districts and other adjacent properties. There were some detail revisions on various maps showing, we have an overall map showing existing land use. And then we have the south end, the north end, and the upper hamlet structures. And then we also have the transition area, which is this whole area surrounding the hamlet, which is not a unified 100 feet. We also went into some detail on the scoping on that to show what other properties in the hamlet might be affected. All right, back to the bookmarks. The zoning section really, again, was primarily technical areas where we had, you know, here we're listing in existing conditions what the code includes, and we hadn't included all of the information on wireless facilities. So that's what got added there. I think that's the same with basically all of this. We worked closely with Sabrina to ensure we had all of the aspects of the code, the existing code in there for these districts. In addition to stories, we added the proposed condition in feet. And then we come to visual. As I said before, I think the primary aspects of the visual in terms of completeness were just identifying the photographs adequately. We also added, even though it was shown in the existing condition, we put the side-by-side models for the existing and proposed. Of course, we've included Torty Gallus's SketchUp models. Here's what I'm looking for. So at the four-way intersection where we did the before and after, we had only showed the after in the impact section. So we put the photos side by side. And that's on all four of those locations. And just an explanatory note, the red lines are the existing building roof lines. The blue is where this existing zoning would permit a line, you know, a building line to be. So as you can see, it would permit higher, even though it's not built out that way. And then this is the total maximum build out in that particular corner in the code. All right. Natural resources, there really were not many changes at all. I think I'll skip ahead unless anyone has any questions on that. Infrastructure, we had a few minor revisions in the stormwater and the water sections to clarify, but the primary edits were to the sanitary section, and I actually have that separately at the end of this presentation, so we can have Mike talk about that at that time, if that's all right. Traffic and parking, there's a full traffic study in the appendix, and then this is a summary of it, but even this is, you know, 30 or 40 pages long. It goes into quite a bit of description of the existing conditions and the impacts. Again, most of these,
Bonnie,
I don't know,
the
John,
major,
you want to go through
yeah.
it?
Yeah, most of the changes were labeling and stuff like that. The biggest changes is in section 3C, where we added a section discussing potential likely phasing and possible funding for the 3 mitigation measures that were identified as part of the process. So we didn't have a very extensive discussion of that, and we have added a couple of pages and did some additional analyses.
Hey, Bonnie, regarding the traffic study and mitigation, what period of time was used to do that study?
15 years.
So
All of the build out scenario, you know, impacts, sorry, were based on a 15-year build out.
The analysis occurred though prior to COVID.
Totally.
Right.
The data was collected
John,
last year.
speak to when the data was collected, if you could.
Last year, last September, I believe.
Okay,
Thank
September
you.
2019.
Thanks.
This is parking. Parking as well. Did you want to add anything in there, John, at this time or no?
No, mostly it was section 3C, and the rest of it, we added a couple of images to help explain things, and we labeled some things a little bit better and changed a couple of words here and there. But
okay. Cultural resources, historic and archaeology really were, I don't know if there were any changes, but very minor editorial. Community facilities, which has to do with schools and police and so forth. There was a request to change the estimate of police number of policemen per population. So we did that. This is also some clarifications on the school section about the 15-year build out again, and how many new students we're talking about, providing a net, not just the overall gross number. This is the police here. That was really it for that section. Again, socioeconomics, it was primarily defining things better. This was definition of the millennials, coming up with some more recent population numbers than the ones we had cited. I don't think there was much other than that in the socioeconomic. I don't think there were any changes in here. Talking about the remediation sites and so forth. Air quality and noise. We added a table with relative noise comparisons, you know, for a lay reader to understand what the decibels we were talking about. Although it does specifically clarify this is not a construction project, but this was in the scope in terms of at least addressing the code, and then the air quality had more to do with, we did add some language here about the air quality and natural light and air circulation after we talked to Tortigalis. So that's what this revision entailed. Alternatives. Again, this was more as primarily revisions to make sure all of the alternatives were taught to the same level of detail. This was primarily, as you know, alternative B was generated by Tortigalis, and they've gone through here all of their assumptions, how they came up with the parking, and so forth. Again, they did a exhibit for alternative several exhibits for alternative B, including the consolidation map for that one. This one has to do with the heights of the buildings, actual buildings or land use. This is land use versus buildings. I mean, there's a lot of, and we also have the build out SketchUp models for this alternative and the same two views that we have for the proposed action. Alternative C, again, we just added a little more detail to bring it up to the same level of detail as the other alternatives. And here we have Tortigallis's build out assumptions for this. As you can see, the same in SketchUp. As you can see, the town land is not developed in this scenario. And then probably, and this is an interesting point, it wasn't completeness, but I'll just bring it up, that the alternative D, Tortigallis, felt that the height reduction was, it turns out it wasn't that much of a difference to go from 5 stories to 4 stories because of the way the build out is done. This red area here is really the only 5-story area on private land that would be affected. The other areas, not that they wouldn't be affected, but that they could be designed differently and you could still achieve the same number of 1-bedroom apartments or square footage, they felt, in the same space. So they didn't change the unit count. It only went down slightly in this area here. And that's an example of a substantive comment where someone might disagree with the assumptions or want to ask why that happened.
And to be clear, nothing would stop us to go from 5 stories to 4 stories if we chose. There's nothing that would prevent us from doing so. This has zero bearing on our ultimate decision in terms of, I mean, it has bearing in terms of the background, but in terms of our legislative ability, it has zero bearing.
Right. It's just providing you with the information to make that decision.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, what Bonnie is doing right now, she's going, she wanted to mention, kind of the alternatives that were approved in the scope, asked us to look at different variations of height, different variations of land in relation to the maximum theoretical build out. So this is all to inform the town board in regards to considering the proposed legislation and changes that you may want to make to that legislation in order to adopt it based on both the information contained in the environmental impact statement as well as public comment. So all of this is feeding your knowledge base to make the best informed decision regarding adoption of the code.
Right. And again, this has been updated in the current draft. This really just gives you a comparison table of the proposed action with the various alternatives, just sort of the key information points, number of units, trip generation, school children, etc. So that's all been updated to comply with the rest of the document. That's there, and these required sections by seeker. Again, it's similar to the executive summary. It's information that's provided elsewhere. I just wanted to quickly go through this because, let me go to the pages again. Appendix A was modified. It's the code itself. Everything's the same in the code of the draft that was accepted back in February, but we put the date change there because these 2 minor revisions. In the neighbor notification section, we took out that notification is required abutting single family detached, and now it just says to all property owners, not just single family detached abutters. And similarly, to comply and make match the affordable housing language, we added at least 5 but less than 10 in this section to make it comport with the county. And then these are the 2 pages from the clean where we indicated that change, and we indicated the affordable standard change. And then the other section that I included here, this is from the most recent draft. And this is just the clean version of where we ended up on the sewer wastewater. And as you will see, the existing conditions was substantially added to provide a level of detail that will give a better basis for the impact evaluation. And then the impacts, again, were evaluated based on the build out. And the bottom line is that the capacity is there. And then the mitigation has all been reviewed as well with a town engineer. And then Appendix G, I don't have to go through these, but basically is just providing the existing information that you have from WSP. And then this is the various districts and how they're split up relative to the map of the study area. And then there's the technical tables. So I don't know if anyone wants to go back to anything in particular that they saw, or I have the clean version here as well. If there's anything in there that anyone had any questions on.
I mean, I have lots of questions based on content, not necessarily based on completeness.
I think that's fair. Jason, I agree. I think a lot of people have that, but as you just noted or seem to know, they're two separate issues. So yes, I agree with Jason.
Yeah, so do I. $1 million on substance, not on content though.
I have no questions either.
I'll just take this down then, and you guys can carry on.
So you have before you, if you, you know, I provided you a memo stating that my office's review of the changes that were submitted by Kimley Horn in relation to the completeness review have been satisfied. I have deemed the document complete in regards to the scoping outline that was approved by the town. I provided to you both my memo that states that, as well as a draft resolution to determine the document complete and circulate the DGEIS in accordance with the seeker requirements to all interested agencies, posted online, so on and so forth, as well as set the public hearing.
Hey, Sabrina, when it comes to those public hearings and work sessions and so forth, what's the process for actually making changes to the form-based code if those should be, you know, requested?
So what will happen is once you set the public hearing date, we have planned 3 public engagement sessions where we will present, where myself and Ivy will present the content of the DGEIS and the attachments and talk about what it actually says. It is a very lengthy, complex document, and we really just need to get to the heart of what it's telling us about the impacts of the proposed legislation you are considering. Then the public hearing will be held and the public will have an opportunity to comment at the public hearing, and you know, for however long the town board determines to extend that public hearing or extend a comment period. Part of that process is also staff will be reviewing the information, and we will be providing you our comments regarding the substance of the material as well. So once the DGEIS is let for public review, All of the information in the comments regarding substantive material will be compiled in a final generic environmental impact statement that will be given to you. And from there, you will make findings, environmental findings based on the impacts that have been identified, the comments that you've heard, and then those findings will help frame changes to the legislation so that you can adjust the legislation accordingly based on your findings. Does that help?
Yes. So again, it's separating the final generic environmental impact statement from which will tell us the impact of the code versus actually making changes to the code itself.
Correct. Correct. Now, please note, as your professional staff working on this, we have changes to the code based on practical experience and trying to work with the code. You will see those as part of the FEIS. There will be suggested changes, and I'm sure that the public has suggested changes to the actual code that will be given to you as part of that FEIS, and it will be your findings that will be an indicator as to whether or not you actually want to change the proposed legislation to be consistent with the comments.
And Jason and Sabrina, I'd add one other comment, and this is for the public as well. There's going to be concurrent hearings. It's going to be a hearing both on the code and on the DGEIS. And it's helpful that when people provide comments, they're specific as to whether it's a comment on the code or a comment on the DGEIS. And when it's a comment on the DGEIS, it helps the staff and the consultants if you specify what section, what particular language, or if it's in the form of a question, so that there can be a response. Because as Sabrina said, the FGEIS is to provide responses to the comments that are raised during the DGEIS hearing.
Thanks, Nick and Sabrina.
Sure.
Nick, I'm going to ask you a couple questions, and this is something that's been restated. It's going to be stated again, but I think education is critical. To articulate again, and I think it was mentioned before by Bonnie, this can go from 5 stories to 4 stories. Nothing prevents us from doing that. There's nothing in the law that would say we could not make that change or adopt whatever we want to adopt in terms of the height of buildings, correct?
That is correct. Once a form-based code is adopted, it's no different than any other zoning or any other local law. It can be changed by this board or subsequent board at any point in time going through the whole local law process. You're not wed to it. It's not set in stone.
In far as change, it doesn't even have to be that out of the gate. We can make it whatever we collectively believe is the appropriate standard out of the gate.
Correct, yes.
All right. Number 2, there's been a statement that there may be some federal issues that would expose us to constitutional litigation. Are you aware of whether or not this is a legal procedure on the part of the town to have a form-based code?
Yeah. So I can speak generally because I'm not aware of any specific criticism of the law,
Right.
But I will tell you that form-based codes are generally accepted. They are introduced and adopted in a number of states. New York has used them. We've worked with municipalities that have adopted them. Westchester County, there are a couple of municipalities that have a form-based code. So it really goes to what is the town's legal authority to adopt regulations of zoning. And that is found in the New York State Town Law, the New York State General Municipal Law, and the New York State Home Rule Law. New York State allows municipalities to regulate and determine for themselves what form they want their zoning to be regulated in. And as Sabrina has mentioned a number of times, there's the traditional code by districts, which is the Euclidean type zoning, and then form-based zoning. Form-based is just another way of zoning. It is legal, it is permitted, and we don't have any concerns.
Thank you.
Okay, Serena, where do we go from here?
You have to consider adoption of the resolution to determine the document complete and set the public hearing for both the DGEIS and the proposed local law, as well as circulation and processing in accordance with the secret requirements to all interested agencies and the community.
Okay, and Jill, I believe we have those 3 resolutions in front of us today.
Right, Nick, we've got them all. This resolution, this 3-page resolution, is in fact covers
Yes.
everything? Okay.
Correct. The board will be right. The resolution will be doing 3 things: declaring the DGIS to be complete, as discussed and described today, scheduling a public hearing on the local law and on the DGIS for October 27th, and directing that staff refer it to and circulate it to the appropriate interested agencies.
This single resolution does all three things.
Yes.
It's in your packet. Anybody has it? Anybody needs it? Can we circulate it?
If you need me to share it, I can share it.
The board likes, I can quickly provide you with an overview and introduce it and read it if you like.
Does anybody on the board have any further comments or questions before we move forward with this?
Nope.
Yeah.
Okay. I see that we have an attendee who has their hand raised at this time. This is a town board work session, and this is not a public meeting. I'm loath to ignore raised hands, and we always try to take comments and questions from everyone. So I'm happy to bring you into the conversation, but I ask that people please save their questions and their comments for the 3 community engagement sessions that we have. So Lyle, can we please bring, I'm sorry, I'm having a bit of trouble with my laptop this morning. Do we?
I think it was Doris Strauss.
Do we
Yeah,
still
it
have
was.
a raised hand?
Hi. it's
Dora, you should be able to speak.
Yes, I just had a question. I understand that Kimberly Horn is the consultant who prepared all this. And when talking about, environmental reviews, I was just curious if you use environmental experts, or are you mainly urban planners, or who are the people who are doing this environmental review, and do they have environmental expertise specifically, or is it more urban planning expertise?
Sabrina, you want to address that?
I can answer that question. So the town board in selecting Kimberly Horn went through a request for proposals and interviewed several consulting firms. We selected Kimberly Horn as well as the other consultants who are affiliated with Kimberly Horn due to their expertise, both in all areas that we felt we needed in order to consider the form-based code. So Kimberly Horn, and Bonnie, you're more equipped to kind of talk about your firm, but it's specifically, there are wetlands experts, there are transportation experts, there are landscape architects, there are planners. There's a group called Tortigalis who have expertise in creating form-based codes. They are architects, and there's an environmental or an attorney who's affiliated with the consultant team, as well as an economic group who have helped put together this DGEIS and the form-based code.
And let me expand upon that. The environmental review envisioned by the State Environmental Quality Review Act, SECRA, is a review of a number of potentially significant adverse environmental impacts. And the environmental impacts are in the areas, as Sabrina mentioned, community character, wetlands, traffic, drainage, sewer utilities, water utilities, and things of that nature. And the scope that the town board adopted addresses all of those potential environmental impact areas as required by the Environmental Review Act. And Kimberly Horn and the group that the town has selected is well qualified to address all of those environmental impact issues that are identified in the State Environmental Quality Review Act.
Okay, and just as a follow-up question, does Kimberly Horn also act as a builder or a developer, or are you strictly consultants?
We're strictly consultants.
Thank you.
No one's in cahoots to do something. I think Kimberly Horn is doing a terrific job doing their expert responsibilities and using their skill set. They're not developers that we're going to work with after the fact.
Okay. So Nick, you were going to go ahead and read the
Yeah, so I'm going to
sessions?
summarize it. Thank you, Ivy. I'm going to summarize. I'm going to read the title in full because that really tells you the substance of it. It's a resolution of the town board to, one, determine that the draft generic environmental impact statement for the Chappaqua Hamlet rezoning project is complete for the purpose of commencing public review. 2, scheduling a public hearing concerning the DGIS and proposed draft legislation regarding Chapter 60 zoning form-based code. 3, instructing town staff to circulate copies of the notice of completion and public hearing, as well as file copies of the DGIS in accordance with the regulations. And 4, referring the proposed draft legislation regarding the zoning to the Westchester County Planning Board and the Town of Newcastle Planning Board. And a copy of the notice of completeness is attached, and the resolution is in the agenda packet and before the board for this morning's consideration. And the public hearing date is being set for October 20th. Excuse me, that's it.
So moved.
Thanks, Nick.
Then we need a second.
Second,
All in favor?
aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, all. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Sabrina.
Have a great
you.
weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a great day, guys.
Thank
Bye.
you.
So we need a motion to adjourn.
Motion
So
to adjourn,
moved.
please.
So moved,
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
aye.
Aye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.